Hello, my name is Corrie McLean and I am one half of Three Sisters Consultancy.
And my name is Ryan McLean, and I'm the other half of Three Sisters Consultancy.
Today, Ryan is going to be asking me some questions around the topic of how we can build meaningful routines at home for children and young people with additional support needs.
And Corey's going to be answering those questions and referring to some key visuals along the way. So let's start at the start. Tell us a little about yourself, Corey, and about Three Sisters Consultancy.
My name is Corrie and I'm a trained teacher with years of additional support needs experience, and I've worked with children and young people, parents and carers, and also school staff to improve the lives of young people with additional support needs. I am part of Three Sisters Consultancy. We are a small family-run training and facilitation consultancy. A lot of our work focuses around the intersectionality between sexual health and disability, but we also do some work around autism and inclusive environments. We're not psychologists, we are not immunologists, but we do have something to contribute around the discussion of COVID-19 and additional support needs, because we're used to explaining difficult and often sensitive health concepts in different ways that are accessible for our children. I also have lived experience as a carer, and that feeds into all aspects of my work. I think routines can provide much needed structure and comfort to children and young people with additional support needs. They are even more important in times of stress and change. In this webinar, we'll explore ways to create positive routines and adapt your surroundings to support your children during these unprecedented times.
So tell us a little bit about what routines are and why they're important for children and young people with additional support needs.
A routine is simply a running order of the day. So it's about knowing what's happening now, and it's about knowing what's happening next. It can be for a morning, it can be for a whole day, or it can even be for a whole week. We use routines in some way or another, or else things would be quite chaotic. Routines have a lot of benefits for children and young people with additional support needs, especially children with autism or learning disabilities. So some of the benefits include it can help with anxiety about the unknown, because if we have a routine, we're able to know what's next. It can help children and young people identify what their day looks like, but it can also help us map out expectations to children and young people. It gives back control to children and young people as well, and it allows for different activities, and it allows for alone time and relaxation time as well. It can also benefit us because it allows us to give our children a sense of business as usual, so it normalises what we're doing on a daily basis, which during an actual quite stressful time, but can also help us as parents and carers cope and plan better, because if we have a routine, we're able to do that a little bit better. I also want to talk about something called social imagination, because social imagination is a term that we use to describe when our children, particularly autistic children, struggle to imagine what's next. And even if it's something they have done before or they know well, some children struggle to imagine what that might look like. We cannot underestimate the black hole of not knowing what is going to happen today, tomorrow, or the next day. Tony Atwood, who has dedicated his life to understanding autism, says, in times of stress or uncertainty, routine becomes even more important to young autistic people. And this is true for all other children with additional support needs as well. So this is something to take into account.
So if there's a parent or carer who is really interested in having more routines in their life, where could they get started?
I think the first thing we need to do is thinking about setting reasonable expectations for your family and also for your child. So you as parents and carers might want to think about realistically how much can you do in a day. So it's important to think about your energy levels and whether they fluctuate, and take into account things like your mood, how much you slept the night before. But also if you, for example, have a chronic illness or a condition, which means you might have to think more about timings and think more carefully about making routines. So we've thought about you, now we need to think about your child. So again, can this fluctuate day by day? Can it fluctuate hour by hour? If your child has had a meltdown or a shutdown, it might be that they have very little focus for the rest of the day, and it's okay to adapt the plans accordingly. Another thing to think about is how long can your child focus on one activity? Can they spend, for example, 4 hours playing Fortnite, but struggle to do a maths game for more than 10 minutes? And can we accommodate that in a routine? Can we involve our children in choosing and ordering tasks? That's really good for lowering anxiety, giving our children that control. Another thing we need to think about is considering sensory sensitivities. So for example, if a task is messy or dirty, can we make it a final activity of the day? So it means that we can change our clothes and we don't have to feel that messy or dirty feeling for the rest of the day. Another thing to think about is your child's energy levels. So do they take medications, for example, that make them drowsy after lunch? Do they have issues with their sleep? And thinking about energy levels can really help you plan out your day. When do they have a lot of energy? When are they feeling more tired? And how can we adapt to that? You know your child's strengths and limits more than anybody else. And forming a new routine, honestly, it involves trial and error. Some children thrive on knowing their routine in advance, while others might only benefit from knowing one activity at a time. Those children might just need a kind of visual. So in the middle of the visual here on the slides, you can see we have a first and then board. So if your child is someone who actually doesn't benefit from knowing what's happening on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis, a simple first and then board gives you the opportunity to tell them, well, right now we're doing, and then after that we're doing this. That also kind of gives our children an understanding of what's next, so we can lower that anxiety around the social imagination. Some children might find following a new routine calming, while others might really struggle or resist it at first, and that's totally okay. You should also consider things like your child's learning style. You know, if they're big on visuals, which we know a lot of additional support needs children and young people are, and they're creative, can they make their own visuals? Do they enjoy drawing? Can we use photos of things to help with that? If they are literal thinkers, we might want to use photographs rather than drawings or symbols. So for example, a symbol of a bathroom might be too abstract, so can we take the photo of a bathroom to make it a more meaningful or even things like you see in the right hand side of our visual, we have objects for schedules. So this is something that can really work, to have even a toothbrush stuck to a wall, because we know that some kids or teenagers are living online. So even if we're using visuals like we've got on the wall, it might be beneficial to think about an online calendar, something like a Google online calendar, so that they have a sense of what's coming next. Some children and young people will need to have more control of their daily activities, so they might want to have a choice board. Ryan, can you move to the next slide for me? Thank you very much. So this is often really useful if our children are resistant to being told what to do. So you see how in Anne-Marie's thing here, she doesn't actually have an order of things that are happening, so she gets to choose it. This is sometimes something that can really help when we're thinking about managing our day. So our children could be part of identifying the levels of energy they have and then be able to identify what task they want to do next. But there is no right or wrong way of what a routine should look like. You know, as long as it's reasonable and it's consistent and it's child focused, that's what matters. So for example, if you look at Michael's slides, he is someone that really benefits from having 5 days in a row, so knows exactly what he's doing, but also he has slightly different visuals that are more cartoony that really benefit him and what he's doing that day. So every child will have a different way of thinking about visuals and will have a different process. It's just trying to find out what works for you.
That's really interesting. I liked as well what you said in that other slide, that you could have 2 children in 2 different houses. One child's learning need might be that they need a physical toothbrush to indicate it's time to brush teeth if they've maybe got more sensory demands. And another child might actually live online. So for them, having a Google Calendar that's shared with the family that pops up and says, get ready for school time or have a bath time, that just slots into their life a little bit better. And it maybe doesn't feel as childish if they're getting older, so they might feel more like, well, this is my kind of grown up. And one of the things that parents often say to us is, I don't want to be condescending to my child, I don't want to baby them. So it's really about what makes sense. We've got some teenagers who are actually very artistically gifted and they make their own symbols, and that means they don't feel like it's a babyish thing, like it's a cartoon thing. They've drawn their own, or they've taken a Polaroid themselves or a photo, and they can kind of use that to feel less like they're being kind of spoken down to like a child, and to feel more like they're in control. Like, I've made this is my routine. So we've kind of talked about different types of routine and how they work. How do you test out a new routine, and what can you expect from the transition into a new routine?
I think the phrase test out is something that's a good thing to say, because when we're making routines in our first phase of that, just plopping in a full day activity and expecting children to follow it is something that probably won't go well. So it might be that we start small. We might want to start basing on everyday events. So for example, we might want to try a getting up and getting ready routine or a bedtime routine. We might notice our child's patterns already and their sensory needs that we've already identified. So for example, they wake up bursting for the loo, so that needs to be the first step on their routine. Or they might really hate the minty taste of toothpaste, so they need to eat breakfast before they brush their teeth. So adding in the parts of the routine that actually you're doing already will help you when you're mapping out what already happens. You know, creating a visual and then referring to it is a great way to implement a routine. Then you can start to add on things. So you can start adding a little bit more, for example, a morning activity. At first, you might want to consider incentives to checking and following the routine. So we think things like well done stickers, or, you know, rewards like, oh, let's have some Minecraft family time, can keep children and young people invested in the routine and help them stick to it. You might also be surprised that your kids will correct you on their routine and add in steps. And what's really good about that is that you see how we're showing our children that they can have control. So having your children take part and asking them what they think should be next in the routine is a great way of making the routine seem more like their thing to do rather than something that you're imposing on them. And it's good to welcome this, you know. It's good to say and, you know, things that we haven't thought about, like, you know, mummy, I need to put on trousers before my shoes. Of course, yes, let's change up the routine. Let's put that down. As much as possible, we want your kids to start checking routines on their own, and we want you to be able to praise that. So using the routines when they're in place, allowing our children to be able to take independence of them. An example visual we have here is something that you can get on eBay. And this is something we want to say, is that we're showing you lots of laminated stuff, but there are lots and lots of families and parents of small businesses that have already done the work for you. It's just, and this I think costs £12. So what's good about this is that it's something that can be taken off with blue tack or Velcro, and it gives the child the ability to reference it themselves. And once they've done, they can take off the visual that they've done, they can put it somewhere else, on the board or on their door or wherever it is that they have this visual. So it gives them the independence and the responsibility of their own routine. And it also stops that question, Mum, what's next? Because you can look at the visual and say, well, look at your visual. You know, what do you think's next in our routine?
So one of the things you often say is it's important to be kind to yourself, and that parents are actually being really kind to themselves, especially when they're transitioning. What advice would you give to parents who've been under a lot of pressure during lockdown?
Honestly, please, as Ryan says, be kind to yourself. Give yourself a break. And this is something that we've learned as carers as well, because parents come to us really, really worried or feeling guilty or upset about how they've gotten through the last 3 months. Maybe they've not been able to have any routine at all, or the kids have been depending on their Xbox for comfort and amusement. But these have been incredibly and extremely stressful times for everyone, and parents should congratulate themselves on the fact that you've made it through so far. I think a gentle transitions into routine will be easier than laying down the law and saying this is the routine for the next week. And we want to stress that there will be days when this will completely fall apart to pieces, and that's okay. That's completely fine. But we do want to say that routine can be transformative for kids. It can make a difference for parents as well and carers as well. So it is worth the emotional investment at the start, because you'll find that it makes a difference at the end. And remember, you aren't in this alone. Once we're headed back to school, get in touch with your school teachers and school staff and support staff to think about general routines and timings, because that might shape your child's day at school as well. It's also a good way and a useful way of starting to build your own day. I've got here a visual here that shows mum has a routine as well as the child has the routine. So that means when the child is playing Lego, they know not to interrupt mum. Or if they do interrupt mum when mum's on the phone, mum's able to point at the visual and say, mum's on the phone, you should be playing Lego. But it also is a good way to show joint time as well. So having a visual like the one we've got on the left-hand side is a great way to show that actually parents and carers can have a routine as well, and that can help shape and prevent children relying as much on us as they have maybe been in the last 3 or 4 months.
I think that's really helpful on the token board as well that has rules. I think that's important to understand that routines aren't just about what comes next, but they can help us to shape expectations for the thing that comes next. So we might say, you know, we're going to go out for a walk, but part of being outside for a walk is that we're going to have safe feet and safe hands, and that's part of the expectations that we're building for that walk time. And it's a good way of transitioning back into school as well. Thanks so much for your time, Corrie.
Thank you.
And thank you for everyone who's tuned in to listen to this. We've got some more specific details in our next video about the transition back to school that will draw back on some of what we've been talking about today.
Thank you.